Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And welcome to this episode in our 10-episode series for the 2022 Holiday Hacks. We're talking about the Southern New Hampshire University article around qualities of successful leaders. And this is episode 7 out of 10. Please go back and listen to the previous 6 if you haven't yet. They're short and sweet and to the point, and you'll be able to get through them very quickly. On this episode, we're going to be talking about the fact that successful leaders are authentic. They act the way they actually are, as opposed to trying to be somebody different than who they are. And this is a little bit of a landmine here because some leaders, maybe you don't want them to act who they really are. They need to be different. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's a great conversation. I immediately think of authenticity and being authentic and like being yourself. And I also want to preface it by saying that I understand that there's also different audiences and different ways that you need to show up as a leader. And if, your day to day versus being in a meeting versus being in some type of like a large business review or, just having different audiences would require you to maybe present yourself a little bit differently, maybe talk a little bit differently. Like there are things where you have to be cognizant of what's going on around you. But I think the authenticity piece is like, if you are somebody who has a lot of energy, that should always be with you. If you are somebody who is willing to have very transparent conversations, or you have a lot of you're willing to be humorous, in situation, like be yourself, be authentic. Of course, read the room, know the audience, but be authentic. But I think that's the thing that, for a lot of people, and what I've learned in leadership is if you want people to be comfortable around you being themselves, you have to be yourself.
Oh, yeah.
And a part of who you are is the leader. That's a part of who you are. So there is absolutely an expectation that you probably carry yourself a little bit differently, you engage a little bit differently, you are aware of things, like whatever that might be. There are definitely characteristics of being the leader that people will see. But you can continue to be yourself and be authentic in all environments. And I think that's really what builds a level of trust and understanding with people.
I had a leader once a long time ago who fortunately I didn't report directly to them, but some peers of mine did. And they weren't great with people, and they prided themselves on authenticity. And so they'd walk around saying the thing like, this is who I am. It's the old, the Cuba Gooding Jr. From Jerry Maguire. These are the ABCs of me, right? Like, like they're not. They kind of owned not being a people person from a standpoint of saying like, I just give it to people straight. I'm. It might be hard truths or hard to hear, but I'm. You can always count on me on being honest and authentic to who I am. It's like, right, but if you're a jerk, we don't want you to be authentic to who you are.
We want you to be unemployed. We want you to
be unemployed. But that's the thing is that I'm okay with when the changing culture of the workforce says that a leader needs to kind of develop skills within themselves that they didn't have before. This isn't one of those things where it's like, oh, well, you're a round peg and the hole was round, now it's square, so get the F out, right? It's the hole has turned square. Now you have to be able to be square with it. You have to be able to be in if you want to stay here. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you get to keep being your authentic self if your authentic self is terrible leadership. It means you have some time to kind of develop yourself into a person who does things the right way. And if you can't, then maybe it is time to exit. Maybe it is time to not be in this role anymore. But authenticity, I don't look at as, is being yourself or not being yourself, depending on like if the qualities you're talking about are desired or not. I look at it as, not feeling like you have to put on a mask depending on who you're talking to. So if you have 5 people report directly to you, if one of them overhears a conversation with you and somebody else, and they look at that conversation and think, that looks like a completely different Lorenzo than the Lorenzo I talk to every day, that's where it becomes a problem. There needs to be this level of, I can rely on Lorenzo talking to me and everybody else in the same way. He's predictable, and I know this is who he is. The way he's saying things to me, I can imagine him saying them the exact same way to his friends and to his family. Now, am I different than his friends and his family? Sure. So because I report to him, I'm going to hear things differently, but that doesn't mean that he's being a different person. It means that, leaders wear many hats, and you have to be able to wear multiple hats consistently at the same time. And so this is kind of an interesting balance here, because you want to say that leaders have to be who they really are, but who they really are needs to be someone who is liked, but who they are has to be someone who is consistent too. So it's really tough to just say, be authentic and then let people go about their day. You have to be very clear on what that means. And so what I want to ask you, Lorenzo, is about a time when you were being your authentic self and you kind of came to the realization that what you were doing needed to be a little bit different. And how you were able to be a little bit different than what the situation called for without being kind of untrue to who your authentic self is. And so I want to ask you that, but first I want to give it up toward one of our sponsors. All right, Lorenzo. So how have you been able to kind of navigate the waters of not being able to, be exactly who you want to be for the moment without it actually feeling like you had to be a different person?
It's something that I even struggle with to this day, which is that I feel very confident in my ability to not only land messaging, but we've talked about this in the podcast before. My SBOs or my strengths, includer, positivity, woo, belief, and developer. And that includer piece, the number one that I have is really reading the room and maybe seeing where something needs to either be changed in the messaging or something needs to be said to bring people into the conversation. I'm just very attuned to that part of bringing people together and making sure that I land the message that I want to land. Being a leader of leaders, where I find myself is that I also need to create that space to allow leaders to do that same thing. And sometimes I need to allow there to be the space for an opportunity to give them either advice, perspective, or correction afterward. If I'm always jumping into that space and feeling like that's what people know me for, that's kind of a thing that I do, I bring a level of energy and inclusiveness into dialogue or messaging, or I'm willing to say something that will maybe reset the room or kind of grab people's attention. When I don't do that, I feel like, am I allowing this to go somewhere where I'm kind of co-signing this in my own silence, but also in a space where I have to let leaders lead that and land that message and see if they are building skill in reading the room, see if they are picking up the same things that I'm picking up, and having that dialogue. And if I'm always jumping in to do those things, it never, I think, allows for there to be sometimes teachable moments. And so I feel most authentic in myself when I'm helping to move a team of people in a space where we kind of want them to have alignment and clarity of maybe expectation or the vision. When I'm not doing that and I'm in the room and and somebody else is doing it, but we're working together on it, that's where I can feel like I really should say something, but also maybe I shouldn't. And I have to step back a little bit, and then I'll question, did I show up the way that I could have shown up? And I still have to work on that. So those are moments where I feel that authentically that's what I want to do, but I also know that there are times when I shouldn't do it, and I have to allow there to be those moments to then be able to talk with that leader or those in the room to help them to figure out and build skill in those spaces as they kind of continue down that path in their career.
Sure. It's the struggle that any leader goes through when you have two kind of really core values that are at odds with each other, where you can't necessarily satisfy both of them equally in the moment, and one of them has to take a backseat to the other one without it feeling like you've kind of shirked that responsibility or kind of gone against that value, because sometimes two values that are important to you can be butting heads with each other. You can't always make sure that you are being true to every single one, even if most of the time you can. How I kind of look at this, I love what you said about reading the room, because I know one of the things that you do a lot is you use humor a lot in a lot of situations, but you also have to read the room. That doesn't mean that you can't be humorous. It means that it has to be timed correctly. And depending on what your relationship was with the person who died, maybe there is an element of really subtle humor that can be brought in there that can lighten the mood and kind of land well. But that takes I don't want to say years of practice. It takes years of relationship. Meaning the more relationship time you have with a person, the more you will know what is appropriate in the moment. And so that's why I think this is so important when it comes to staying authentic, is that the stronger your relationship is with an individual person, the more likely you are to be able to be authentic and to know that what you are doing is going to land correctly. And the less of a relationship you have with a person, the more likely you are to be kind of withdrawn and held back and not being true to your authentic self. So if you're a leader, one of the biggest responsibilities you have is to have that relationship with every single one of your people, because without that relationship, you will not be able to be as authentic as you can be. The stronger your relationship is, the more kind of examples each of those people will have, as far as like, I know who Lorenzo really is. I know who Chris really is as a leader, and I can rely on that. And so when Chris or Lorenzo, when they're being their authentic selves, I know where that's coming from, which is a place of positivity, not that they're making light of a situation they shouldn't be making light of. Nothing gets read into incorrectly. It's read into correctly, because the time is there, the history is there. It's no different than you would act differently towards a person the first day you met them versus if you've worked with them every single day for 2 years. That's a very different relationship. And if you're a leader, having those relationships means spending the time with a person so that you are more likely to be able to be authentic with them at every interaction.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up the show, I think one of the things that I feel makes us authentic is kind of our gratitude for our listeners and those that engage with us. So I just wanted to take a second and thank a couple of people, because we've had a lot of listeners that have been reposting the show, specifically on LinkedIn. We've gotten a lot of messages. I've spoken with a lot of people that have talked about the show and brought up episodes that have been helpful for them. So just real quick, Kristen McKay, Barbara Velasquez, thank you so much for continuing to share our content. Crystal Dr. Crystal has been a supporter from day number one. And we always appreciate and love her for that. That's Dr. Crystal Crystal Denmark Porter. Sorry, I want to make sure I get it right. And then also Paige Hardman. Thank you so much for continuing to share and engage with the content. Also, shout out to Alicia and Shar. Who else? I'm trying to remember. We've had a lot of people that have talked about the podcast recently, but we just want to say thank you. This is something that Chris and I over 5 years now have put a lot of just our time and passion and interest in. We really enjoy it. We celebrate all the milestones, but we also know that it's the listeners and those that engage with us that bring up questions, send us articles, send us things all the time for us to kind of dig into and look at and talk about. But also Lindsay, but just super grateful for all of that, because it makes it a lot more fun, and it reminds us that there's some value that's being added in our crazy conversations, in our perspectives on leadership. But we really enjoy this. So I just want to pause and say thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have all shaped the show too. This isn't just the feedback you give isn't like, oh, that's sweet, more feedback. It's we have changed the direction of the show in little ways here and there as we move forward because of that feedback. And we have altered our own way of thinking on certain things by getting this kind of feedback. And ultimately, that's what the entire show is about. It's about learning from the experiences that you have in order to be a better leader. And we are constantly learning from our own experiences, not just in our roles as leaders, but from everybody who listens to the show.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.